Oh, oh, good evening, y'all.
Good evening. Good evening.
I'm Liz. This is Connie.
Hello, hello.
We're Good Trouble. We're going to invite you all to sing some songs for joy and justice and solidarity with us. Because we know something's got to anchor our courage to keep the movement alive, or we all go up in smoke, right? And the singing is a good container for that. So this is a song by the Peace Poets. They sing, my liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. So let me hear the people say, let's get free. And you all say,
let's get free.
let's get free. Let's get free. So I'm going to sing it, and you sing it back twice. Let's get free.
Let's get free. Let's get free.
And then you have to like raise your eyebrows and get your face involved, because let's get free is not like, oh damn, we have to get free. Like, my liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. Let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Yeah.
Let's get free.
My liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. Let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free. Let's get free.
Love it. Now you sing the first part with me too, right? So, my liberation is your liberation. Your liberation is my liberation. Let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Yeah,
Let's
here we
get
go.
free.
My liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. Let me hear the people say, let's get free.
Let's get free. Let's get free.
Black liberation is white liberation, and there ain't no place for hate and liberation. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. Sing that last line. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. Yeah, again. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. That's right. Queer liberation is straight liberation, because there ain't no place for hate and liberation. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. Call it back. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. One more time. It's here, liberation is now. Liberation is the life that I'm about. My liberation is your liberation, and your liberation is my liberation. Let me hear the people say, let's get free. Let's get free. Let's get free. Let me hear the people say, let's get free. Let's get free. Let's get free. Woo! All right. So that's a song by the Peace Poets. They write a lot of beautiful music movement out of the Bronx here. We're going to teach you a couple more.
Yeah. The next song, the words are so easy. Am I willing? This song comes from the Pacific Northwest, from a organizer, visionary, song leader, song catcher, Ale Blakely. Yes. So there are 3 layers. I'm going to invite you to join me on that. And then Liz will add another layer over here. And then there's another layer you can opt in.
Choose your own adventure. Sing along with what works for you.
Right. So we're bossy, but also feel free to
Permissionizing.
choose your own agency. So, am I willing? 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 Am I willing?
Keep it up. Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Try it. Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Let it be a question for you. Am I willing? Am I today? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do? High harmonizers, join me. Say, am I willing? 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 Am I willing to do the work? Am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to do the work? Join the last layer. Am I willing? Am I willing? Oh. Claps for yourselves, y'all. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
So we are Good Trouble. We lead music for joy and justice and grief and solidarity and movement work all over the Twin Cities. If you're like, oh, I need more of this in my life, come talk to us afterwards. And we're also trying to seed this sort of call and echo movement singing out to our movements locally to say, song is a tool that you can use, right? And we're trying to train up some new song leaders in the movement. And we're in the process of writing new music for some of these movements. And so I read a quote recently in a book by Casper ter Kuile called The Power of Ritual. And I said, I need this to be like burnt into my brain and my bones. And so I had to make it into a song to do that. And so I'd like to teach it. I'm going to sing the whole thing through once, and then I'm going to teach it to you line by line so that you can join in here. And this is what Casper says about how we have to roll to each other. All right. He says, the interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed, but spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. And I was all right, Casper. Like, that's what we need. So we say the interlocking systems of oppression. Sing that back to me. The interlocking systems of oppression. And you can let that be kind of like spiky in your mouth because they're kind of nasty. The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. Depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. But spiritual practices cultivate courage. But spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other. So that we will risk more for each other. So that we will risk more for love. So that we will risk more for love. Lovely. I'm going to do some longer chunks now to sing back. So he goes, the interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. But spiritual practices cultivate courage. Try that bit. But spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. So those two back up, try that. So you say, so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. Let's try the whole thing.
You can do it.
The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. But spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. 1, 2, 3, 4, you got it now. The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. But spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. Now, the way I wrote this is that it's actually around. I think we can manage it, yeah? If you want to start. And then what I like to encourage people to do is when we get to the risk more for each other, to like look around. Like, who are we risking this? It's for each other, right? In the room. All right, so let's do half and half, yeah? Connie, can you start?
Ready? The interlocking systems of oppression.
The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed. But spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love.
The interlocking systems of oppression depend on us feeling alone and ashamed.
The spiritual practices cultivate courage so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love, so that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. One more time. So that we will risk more for each other, so that we will risk more for love. Thank you, friends.
Well, thank you, Good Trouble. Appreciate it. My name is Clarence White. I'm the Associate Director here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you, everyone, for being here at the library today. Also, thank you, everyone who's joining us virtually via Zoom. We appreciate you being here. I'm going to start out with a few housekeeping things. The first and most important is the restrooms are downstairs, so there's an elevator that way and stairs that way, and you will find them without too much wandering. Let's see, the second thing is, there are envelopes on the chairs. If you are willing and able to contribute to this cause, this energy, that would help us out a lot, as it always does. And folks who are on Zoom, you can do that through our website, or if you're listening to this after today, the recording, eastsidefreedomlibrary.org, and you can do the same thing. The last housekeeping thing, there is a guest book back by the door. If you are joining us today in person, it would be great if you signed in and let us know you are here. And we have a newsletter that goes out twice a month. We barely send out more than that, but it lets you know of so many of the things that are going on here. And there are a lot of things going on here. So please join us for that. Speaking of upcoming events, in a couple of days, Saturday afternoon, we are going to have a conversation pop-up exhibit with artist Anton Vasquez. Our longtime friend Aaron Johnson Ortiz will be in conversation with him. So that is Saturday the 30th. And all of these events are on our website or on the in the newsletter if you do already get our newsletter. On the 5th of October, we are launching our banned book series. We're going to have several events through the end of the year. and probably some during Banned Book Week and Banned Book Month next year as well. So keep your eyes open for that. But the first is called Beyond Banned Books, Rising Against Fascism. We are honored to have Rod Ferguson with us and Robin Kelly. So that will be great. On the 8th, we have a reading by a lot of stellar writers here in the Twin Cities. It's called The Memory Fields of Water, Women Writers on Water Crisis and Rescue. It's really an all-star lineup. I'm not going to read all the names, but they are people who, whether you're a younger person in the literary scene here in the Twin Cities, or someone like me, or maybe you've been along longer than me, you'll want to see this. So that is on the 8th here at the library. And on the 12th of October, we have a screening of a series of films in a series called Beyond Walls, which is about rethinking the idea of prisons. Some prison abolitionists will be here. We'll have a screening and discussion afterwards. So, and the folks who are going to join us for that will also be interesting. Let's see, what else do I need to tell you? Yeah, I think that is it. Before we, well, I'm going to be introducing Leah Robshaw Robinson, sorry. And just, yep. Okay. We have a very complicated system of doing things here. Don't worry, there are no trap doors, but there are doors that need our attention. So, and some of us, our ears are trained to know when some of them need attention. So a couple of us, our ears perked up, so that was the distraction. But Leah Robshaw Robinson, Executive Director of our partners in this event, Friends for a Nonviolent World, will be introducing the event. But first, we're going to have a land acknowledgement. So Erica, if you would like to come and take care of that.
I should take this off. Okay. I'm happy to see you. Some people I know and some people I don't. So humans have been on this land for 10,000 years. They are the antecedents of the Dakota people. 10,000 years. Oh, 10,000. Oh, that's what these are for. Well, okay then. So humans have been on this land for 10,000 years. They are the antecedents of the Dakota people. 10,000 years. By contrast, the United States has been a nation for 247 years. My people, my ancestors, Northern and Western Europeans, first arrived here 531 years ago. This is the ancestral and current homeland of the Dakota people, who, along with the Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples, have stewarded this land for millennia. The Dakota name for this land is Minnesota Makoche. We acknowledge that this land was stolen from those who lived here through unjust, deceptive, broken treaties, forced removal, imprisonment, and attempted genocide. We acknowledge that this history of stolen land has been minimized, pushed aside, hidden or denied, mostly by my people, we who are our antecedents are Western and Northern Europeans. We acknowledge that this settler colonialism is ongoing. Our presence, the white people in this room, continues the legacy of occupation, theft, violence. All of us who live in South America, Central America, North America, live on stolen land. But it's only my people, people of Western and Northern Europe, who did the stealing. Finally, we all acknowledge our commitment to show up for racial justice and to do the work of dismantling white supremacy. Can I get a yes for that? Come on, come on. And that includes showing up for Indigenous communities and standing in solidarity or being in solidarity with them in the struggle for sovereignty, justice, and healing. Most of these words are from the Makoche Ikichupi land reclamation project. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to the Makoche Ikichupi people for these words, and welcome.
Okay, guys, so my name's Leah Robshaw-Robinson, Executive Director of Friends for a Nonviolent World, and it's just awesome to be here with you all, be able to partner on this event with Eastside Freedom Library, and to have our awesome guests, Minister JaNaé Bates and George Lakey, with us to be having a conversation that we just kind of get to sit in on and listen and learn. Friends for a Nonviolent World is an organization that was founded here about 42 years ago by the local Quaker community. So we're Quaker inspired, and we work to promote and create peace and justice in our community. And we do that through using the principles and practices of nonviolence to transform conflict and to address the root causes of violence. So we run conflict transformation workshops in prisons and in the community. Produce an everyday nonviolence podcast that kind of lifts up the voices of amazing humans such as Minister JaNaé Bates and George Lakey and all sorts of other people using nonviolent struggle to make the change we need in our community and to heal the wounds that violence creates. We run a week-long people camp, which is an intergenerational peace and justice themed camp for a week. And we also organize community workshops, actions, and dialogues such as tonight's event. So it is my honor to be here, to be able to introduce to you our guests and also to invite you to get involved in the work of all the things that are happening here. There's just going to be so many awesome ideas and connections of organizations and people that make this happen. And there's a bookmark here that shows some of the names of the different groups that have been a part of George Lakey's book tour. That includes, of course, the folks who are here who made this particular event happen. That would be Eastside Freedom Library, Isaiah, Equate, which is the organization that George is currently organizing with, Good Trouble, and we got some awesome support from Twin Cities Friends Meeting, Minneapolis Friends Meeting, Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers, and Twin Cities Nonviolent for this. So yeah, you guys, there's a lot of good stuff happening here in the Twin Cities. So the folks who we're gonna be hearing talking about how do we build race and class solidarity, the solidarity that we need in order to create the mass movements that we need to move us through the tumultuous times that we're facing. One of whom is Minister JaNaé Bates. She's the Communications Director for Faith in Minnesota and Isaiah, where she specializes in integrating grassroots, faith-based organizing and narrative strategy. With almost 2 decades of academic and professional experience in ministry, social justice, and communications, Minister JaNaé has helped develop and implement the race, class, gender narrative framework for both in Minnesota and across the US. This is a narrative used in organizing, politics, and movement to build a robust multiracial democracy. Her focus in work, life, and ministry is about making space for others to experience redemption and justice. So I'm going to invite Minister JaNaé Bates to come on up, and we'll welcome her to the stage. All right. Our other guest panelist this evening is lifelong nonviolent activist and social change movement elder, George Lakey. Yeah, George Lakey. his first, you can come on up, why not? His first arrest was in a civil rights campaign, which sent him to prison with many black comrades where he learned movement songs and courage. He was later on the training staff for Freedom Summer in 1964 in Mississippi, and he co-wrote the main handbook that was used by the civil rights movement, a manual for direct action. Later, he organized a Philadelphia-wide biracial coalition called Jobs with Peace that linked the goals of radical racial justice and conversion of the arms industry to civilian needs. His life story is recounted in his new memoir, Dancing with History, A Life for Peace and Justice, which is available for purchase tonight. Subtext Books is, oh, okay, well. Okay. All right, well, in any case, it's an awesome memoir. I highly recommend checking it out because it's just nice. It's just nice to read the story of people who have lived interesting lives and done good work with their life. So tonight's event is going to be moderated by Peter Rachleff. Peter Rachleff is is a historian of the American working class and an activist for social justice. His books include Black Labor in Richmond, Virginia, 1965 to 1890, and Hard Pressed in the Heartland, The Hormel Strike and the Future of the Labor Movement. Peter taught at Macalester College from 1982 to 2012, and in 2013 with his partner Beth Cleary, co-founded the East Side Freedom Library that we are in right now in this moment. Yeah, this place, right? Peter and Beth stepped down as co-executive directors of the East Side Freedom Library in 2022, and both now serve on the organization's board. Okay, I think it's time to turn it over to our guest tonight, so let's give him a round of applause.
There we go. So I'm sure the first question is, who is this handsome creature with Minister JaNaé? This is Rupert. Anything you want to say about Rupert?
Rupert is 11 years old,
Wow.
3.5 pounds, a little toothless teacup poodle who is very loving and sweet, and also hypoallergenic in case anyone has dog allergies.
Good boy, Rupert. Yes.
Yeah, he's a chill guy.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and just mention that the mission of the Eastside Freedom Library is to inspire solidarity, work for justice, and advocate for equity for all. When Beth and I imagined starting this, we wanted to address how the East Side had changed, and that with neoliberal globalization, 15,000 unionized blue-collar jobs had been sucked out of the East Side. A lot of European-descended people moved away. At the same time, neoliberal globalization was upending the lives of people in Southeast Asia, East Africa, and Central America, thousands of whom moved here. We were concerned, we live in this neighborhood, we were concerned that the people who had remained were not welcoming the new people, our new neighbors, and that we were both confident that if people could only share their stories with each other, they would discover how much they had in common, rather than absorbing the dominant narrative of being threatened by each other. And so that was the idea. We looked around for buildings. The city was moving out of this neighborhood library. The person who was advising us said, not only is there not a lead paint or an asbestos problem, they even have an elevator. And so we went for the building, and then we said, oh shit, it's a library, we need to get books. And so we began to ask friends and comrades and retiring colleagues and And we now have 38,000 books. And really everything that's here, from the stage that we're sitting on to the chairs that you're sitting in, all of these things have been given to us by people in this community. And so it really is their space. And it's so great to be able to welcome Minister JaNaé Bates and George Lakey to this space tonight. And I feel like everything that we do here leaves a little bit of spirit behind. I think that Liz and Connie have already contributed some spirit that is going to stay with us. They'll have to come back periodically to ignite it again, but it's all good. And so what we wanted to do tonight is be pretty simple. I have 2 questions to pose to Minister JaNaé and George, and then we hope that will generate a conversation, and then we invite you who are here and also our friends who are out there in cyberspace to use the Q&A function on your Zoom in order to type in questions, and Clarence is going to be tracking questions, and we're going to keep working on our hybrid etiquette so that those of us who are physically here don't forget those who are with us in intent and spirit, but not physically with us tonight. So we'll move back and forth for questions and comments. So the first question is, how do we successfully work together across our differences to fight for racial and economic justice? Minister JaNaé, you want to start?
Sure. Hey, everybody, how y'all doing? Yes, it is so great to be here. I actually live a couple blocks from here, so this is my neighborhood, and I love the East Side. It is an incredible spot to be alive in right now, like in this era, in this time, and the fact that my neighbors are Hmong and Black and Latine, and it's really, really amazing. So to answer this question about it's like grounded in multiracial solidarity, and all right, I'll tell you all. I'm not originally from Minnesota. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, and in Cleveland, Erica, you might want to. He wants to roam. In Cleveland, it is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, which is predominantly Black. And when I say Black, I mean African American. And so if you live on the east side, work on the east side, you could go a very long time without seeing anyone of any other ethnic background, racial makeup. And so when I came to Minnesota, when I was getting ready to come to Minnesota, and I came here for my dynamic work at Isaiah, and when I was getting ready to come here, my executive director said, okay, I need you to know something about Minnesota. It's really, really white. And I was like, yeah, okay. And she's like, no, like really white. And so in my mind, I envisioned this place to be as white as a grain of rice on a paper plate in a blizzard, right? And so to find so much diversity here, to have, like I said, the fact that we have Hmong neighbors and East African neighbors, to have the largest population of Somalis outside of Somalia, the largest population of Hmong folk outside of Laos, like it's just like, this beautiful mosaic, right? And I get to work in an intentionally multiracial space. And so when I think about this question about like how do we build multiracial solidarity, what I have learned over the years in being in multiracial spaces is that it is going to require all of us across race, across income, across class, to get clear about our own stake. And what I mean by that is that all of us have stake in the game. All of us have skin in the game. And I think sometimes when we talk about anti-racism, or we talk about the necessity to fight fascism, and we talk about the ways in which white supremacist capitalism has taken over this country, this world, we think, okay, then that means black people and brown people and indigenous people. They have stake in the game. And then folks who would consider themselves white or Caucasian or Northeastern, or, you know, like these folks who would not consider themselves a person of color or BIPOC, don't. And so they get into the fight with a, well, I need to do good things for other people. I need to be, you know, good white savior. Or I actually don't see how this helps me, but I want to help my neighbor. And that can be, it can be a good thing. It is a good thing to want to help your neighbor. But the reality is that you need to know what your own stake is. What is beautiful about multiracial organizing, and I mean organizing, not just the mobilization. Mobilization is good, but actually being in deep relationship with people across race and class and income and faith and place, is that you start to learn about your own pain to power story. You start to learn that I was raised in this particular era. My dad lost their job because of XYZ, and then was told a particular story about why. They became an alcoholic because of da-da-da. Like, and actually start to see the ways in which our stories are so interconnected. A lot of our woes and problems are so much the same. The only difference is that we're told a different story about why. And so when we're told to point the finger at somebody else, or we actually hold that as shame and fault and guilt, then we actually don't ground ourselves in what actually builds us up to be able to truly connect with someone who is different. And to recognize that we share the same pains, the same woes, and often have the same villains. And so we can fight together, truly, in true solidarity, not in like this weird, false like allyship that is very surfacey, because the reality is if I'm fighting with you together and you don't know what your own stake is, when it gets hard, you run. And I need my white brothers and sisters and my Latinx brothers and sisters and my Somali brothers and sisters and everybody else across every kind of binary, non-binary stratosphere to be in this with me and know what their stake is, and I know what my stake is, and I know that we need each other for our collective liberation. And so that is the kind of work that I get to do with Isaiah. That's the kind of work I look forward to doing with all of you, and that's why I'm here.
So glad you're here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Wow. Yeah. Well, George, you're up.
Thank you, thank you. Let's see, thank you. That works better, right? Yes. Oh, whoa. Whoa. I just want to say amen to what has just been said. Oh, my. And I can add a perspective that I would argue will help this process happen that you invite us into. And also to admit that this involves my admission of the biggest professional mistake I've made in my life. So hope you don't mind a true confession here, but my field is sociology. That's what I've been trained in and have taught. And sociologists have a tendency to look at any social system and ask how much solidarity is there within it, how much integration is there within that system, as compared with how much conflict there is within that system, right? So I'd like to talk a little bit about the polarization that we're now experiencing in the U.S. How many of you would say that it's on your mind sometimes, that there's a lot of conflict, a lot of throwing knives at each other, that kind of thing going on? Yeah, and I was tracking that because of my field. I was tracking that a dozen years ago, and I was getting worried, actually, because I was thinking, well, if we're so busy just sniping at each other, how are we going to achieve what you're talking about? How are we going to achieve sufficient basis of unity that we can take steps forward toward racial justice, economic justice, and so on? So I was getting worried. And at the same time, though, I was doing research on a book, it turned out to be this book, Viking Economics, about the modern-day Vikings, about the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Danes. I was wanting to know not only how their economic system works, such that it's way, way higher standards of equality, actually much more equality, much more respect for the environment, much more actually happiness. There's such a thing as a world happiness scale, and they're consistently on the top of the happiness scale. They're just in so many ways better shape than we are. And I wanted to describe the economic system that supports them to be in such good shape. But I also wanted to find out, in doing the research, how did they get there? Because I thought, hey, if they got there, you know, maybe we can learn something from that. Because 100 years ago, they were in rotten shape, which is how some people in Minnesota got here, because they were leaving Norway, they were leaving Sweden, right? They were leaving Denmark because it was a mess there 100 years ago. And so they were getting out of town, hoping for the opportunity in the US because their own land they were writing off. So there's been this flip around. Now they're way up there, we're here. And I wanted to know how they made their leap from where they had been to where they are now. Reasonable. I mean, you got to do something in your life, so you might as well try to find that one out. And whoa, was I ever surprised? Because I found out that it was in the 1920s and 30s when they made their big leap forward. And that was the period in their histories that it was the biggest period of polarization that they had experienced in modern times. Nazis were marching in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark. Growing right-wing movement, fascist, Nazi movement. And at the same time, the communist movements were growing in those countries. And they were very excited, organizing for the dictatorship of the proletariat so they could be like the Soviet Union next door. I would call that kind of a difference of opinion. And that's what was going on, tremendous lot of conflict going on. And that was, though, the period, the 20s and 30s, when they made their big leap forward. That contradicts my understanding of what polarization does. I figure polarization keeps making mountains out of molehills, it keeps increasing conflict across whatever differences, and making it harder to make positive change. But they made their positive change at the period of greatest polarization. What's going on? Let's get to the bottom of this, George. So I thought, okay, I need more cases, obviously. Maybe the Nordics are just weird. And that's why they pulled off, and nobody else could be expected to do that. So I thought, how about my own country? The 1930s. Hey, that's the decade I was born in. The 1930s. Nazis were able to fill Madison Square Garden for a rally. Growing Nazi movement. And at the very same time, it was the glory period of the American Communist Party. Huge conflict going on, tremendous conflicts going on. Workers were taking over entire factories of major corporations. There was a very, very high level of conflict. And it could be argued, I would argue, that the 1930s was the decade of greatest progress that we made in the first half of the 20th century. This is not helping me understand what's going on, Okay, another case, George. How about another case? How about the 1960s in the United States? Some of you, any of you around in the 1960s? There are a few. Yeah, okay. So would you say that was a particularly placid time, very boring? The Nazis were back in the 1960s. The Ku Klux Klan had gone from lynching to blowing up churches. And on the other hand, tremendous rise of leftist activity all over the country, especially California did some of the more colorful stuff, as you'd expect. But anyway, lots and lots of activity on the left, tremendous conflict, a lot of bombings, way more bombings than we're experiencing so far. And the 1960s was the period of the greatest progress that we made in the second half of the 20th century. What gives? I want to understand this. So apparently, polarization, although it feels bad, and let me tell you, I experienced the pain of it. I mean, my family can tell you, they will sometimes walk in at breakfast time in the morning, and I'm sitting there over my granola, reading the newspaper and crying. It hurts my heart to see some of the bitterness that's going on and the violence that's going on. And yet, I have to somehow make my peace with the realization that polarization can coincide with the kind of possibility that you inspire us with. Maybe even be injecting a kind of energy that wobbles things, that upsets things, upsets all kinds of old stuff in such a way that we can make breakthroughs that in a more placid period would also be a more frozen period. I'm really thinking about what you said. It's just really interesting. And so that's what I started to realize might be the possibility. And frankly, I would rather act on that assumption that there's movements happening now that didn't happen 10 years ago. People are in motion who weren't in motion 10 years ago, that there's a kind of flexibility going on. Young people are acting very easily. College teachers are trying to keep up with their students. A lot going on, right? And that has to do with the polarization. So that, frankly, friends, really shifted me a whole lot. So even though, as I say, it hurts my heart to see the pain that goes with it, why feel the pain if we don't also see the possibility?
Yeah.
Right? Right? So that's what excites me, and that's what I wanted to throw into the conversation with you.
Yeah.
And of course, with you.
Great.
Yeah,
Minister JaNaé, you want to respond to that?
Yes,
Yeah.
that gave me goosebumps. I am thinking about this notion of polarization is really interesting because I think oftentimes when we feel it, like you named, like this feels weird. Okay. Sorry. All right, there we go. I think a lot of us have felt the anxiety and the stress, and even if you're just having how's the weather conversation with someone and you're worried, you happen to see some emblem that looks like, oh shoot, they're on the other side. Where's this conversation gonna go? You feel like the heat rise in your body, and it can be distressing, right? And so we tend to always look at polarization as a negative, but part of the work that I get to do, and you may have heard, I'm a narrative strategist, and so while I'm not a sociologist like yourself, I do get to do quite a bit of research and language research about how we speak and the things that we say. And so I run these race, class, gender narrative trainings, and have been for quite a few years, where we train people in how to talk about the world around us in a way that softens hearts and minds. And that sounds lovely, right? It's about unity and coming together, but a core element to the strategy requires alienating opposition. And the reason that is because when we do all of this grand research about where people are, and it's not just partisanship. As a matter of fact, the secret is people's ideological bent is actually not about whether they check red or blue in November. It is way more foundational than that. And When we have done this research, what we found is that people who are in this oppositional group, and I want to be clear again, it has way less to do about your partisanship. There's a whole series of things that makes up if you ideologically, like, fundamentally believe certain things. This oppositional group, you actually want to alienate them because at the core, when it comes to the makeup of, or their worldview about race, about class, about gender, and about the role of government, those things tend to be probably the opposite of where we would want them to fall, right? And they're what we call a static opposition. So, like, they believe that wealth is totally created by meritocracy and that poverty is the fault of the individual. They believe that racial inequity is a natural occurrence that has happened by things like eugenics or cultural inferiority, right? They think that when it comes to gender, that things like the Me Too movement have gone too far. They in general believe that the government should be small enough to drown in a bathtub. That is a literal quote, right? And so this group of people, if you are saying things and they like it and want to unify with you, what are you saying? You might be saying puppies are cute and I like rainbows, but that does not liberate our people, right? So it is actually a barometer of how much movement you're making when you actually alienate that group of folks. And I'll tell you, like nationally, that group of people is between 20 to 24% of people. In the state of Minnesota, and we iteratively test this every quarter or so, it's about 22% of Minnesotans. But I'll also tell you folks on the other end of the spectrum that we call base, who believe the complete opposite of opposition, they're about 22% of Minnesotans too. That means you got almost nearly 60% of people who are what we call persuadables, right? And they're in the middle. And the three things that move them, I'm sorry, I'm turning this into a race, class, gender, narrative training, but very quickly, the three things that move them is a bold message that is said with confidence and that is said consistently. Think about in our political arena, who does that? Right? Who's bold, who says really bold things and says it very confidently, and they say it over and over and over again, no matter how truthful it is or not, right? But that is what moves persuadables. We can do that too on our side, right? But it also means we need to be willing to alienate opposition, which requires polarization because it demands a moral choice. You have to choose a side.
So, yeah.
Wow.
So, I believe I'm right that the two of you have not met before this evening. No. And so this is not a conversation that you've been having.
No.
This is flowering while we're here.
Well, there was that 2 a.m. phone call when we were plotting and scheming.
Yeah. So what do you think, George, about Minister JaNaé's strategy for how to push alienation in order to reach the persuadables?
Absolutely. No, that's exactly my perspective. After tons of research on, so major positive changes in a variety of countries, a variety of situations, that seems to be the case. And a great example of that from our own history is the civil rights movement, and just watching Dr. King moving on that front, right? Mm-hmm. Very, very powerfully stating things. And not only in his words, but also in his strategies. He said, don't bother to just go out and do an occasional protest to express your opinion and say, blah, 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 this is how I feel. Because that doesn't actually move the dime. It doesn't matter. What really matters, says Dr. King, is a campaign, a nonviolent direct action campaign to go for what you want. Well, that does exactly what you're talking about. Because once you identify the problem group that's messing with or getting in the way of justice, and then go after it with a demand, it will respond as you say. it will be antagonized. And rightfully so in a certain way, right? Because they're right that we want to take something away from them. They love doing whatever it is they're doing. A case that I talk about in my book, Dancing with History, and give a fair amount of detail on, was the 7th largest bank in the country, had quite a profitable income stream by tearing down mountains. They would blow up mountains with dynamite. They were giving the money to coal companies to do that in order to get coal out of the mountains, because it's cheaper to do it with dynamite than to pay workers who have families to support. But no, we won't do that. We'll blow up the mountains instead. Can you imagine what that does to the environment? And that's what they were doing. So we followed Dr. King's advice. So we did a campaign on that bank to force it to give up that practice. And we were a small group. We started in a living room. And we watched every film we could get hold of the civil rights movement to learn. Because I don't know, I've worked a lot in other countries. We are so lucky in this country to have the history of the civil rights movement available to us, and even in film as well as many books and articles, because it's basic, it's fundamental in telling us how to win and make a difference. I ended up writing a book, How We Win, to make it just crystal clear, but it's also there in the films. So in our group, that's what we did. We watched movie after movie after movie. Oh, that's how it's done, that's how it's done. And then we went after this bank and we won. At first they laughed at us. They thought, oh, right. So this group in the living room is coming after the 7th largest bank in the country? And they ended up giving up that profitable income stream because it took us 5 years, but we messed up so much of their operations that they decided it'd be better just to give up that income stream than to have another year with this gang. Yeah. So, I mean, I completely agree with the way you put it. It doesn't mean, of course, that we have to make monsters out of them, or pretend they're inhuman or anything like that, because these structures of domination that are characteristic of our economy, I mean, some very nice people can be doing that stuff, right? Without even realizing that they are oppressing and hurting people, and they need to have that opportunity removed from them. So let's give them a break.
So I think listening to the both of you is very inspiring and encouraging. But I want to raise a second question that I'm going to blame Leah, but it's an important question. And I think in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and the work that a lot of people have done on the ground, we hear a lot about trauma. We hear a lot about healing. How do we, it may sound inspiring to think about shaking your fist at the bad guy and getting more people to shake their fists along with you. But it can also be grueling and difficult to do that day in and day out. And so I want to take Leah's cue and ask you both to reflect a little bit about how do we do this without losing ourselves in the midst of doing it. And we'll ask George to start first on this one.
Well, as a Quaker group, we had the resource in common of spiritual access, through silent meditation and prayer. And so we did that a tremendous lot. To the bank's consternation, we tended to do it on their lobby floor. So we would go into the bank, just, business as usual was going on there. We would circle up. Can you imagine? I'm in a group this size or even smaller. Circle up on the lobby and in the middle of the floor and start praying and testifying, and telling what the bank was doing. And you can imagine the tellers were losing track of quarters and dimes, and the customers, what did I come in here for? And the bank manager going crazy. What should I do? Should I call the police? I don't want to call the police. But it looks like I'm going to have to call the police, and so on and so on. And then, of course, we decided before beforehand, each time we did that, and we did it many, many times, we decided, are we willing to be arrested or not? And sometimes we would be, sometimes we wouldn't be, and whatever, if the police came and we were not willing to be arrested, we would just leave when the police told us to leave. But otherwise, we would be arrested. And again, in jail, even though I personally hate the sound of steel on steel when that cell door closes. I hate it. I've done it many, many times. I still hate it. But again, Spirit is present, isn't it? Spirit is present. That's how close Spirit is. Spirit is right there if we just remember and open. And that was our spiritual practice that enabled us to sustain. I mean, a lot of people will think, well, a year's campaign, that's plenty or something. But it took us 5 years. But it was 5 years of growth, actually, spiritual and personal growth. A lot of singing. Yes, we did a lot of singing. We sang in bank lobbies. Yes, we brought new songs to some of those bankers, let me tell you. Songs they had never heard before. So we did all that. We reached for those resources, those spiritual resources.
Minister JaNaé.
Yes. Well, as a minister, I feel it is very necessary that I give an amen to that. And we absolutely do tap into our spiritual practices. And I also wholeheartedly believe in the notion of praying with your feet. And, I'm going to have just a moment of vulnerability with you all in the room. I've been doing this work my whole life because I'm a Black woman. And I have seen a lot of folks experience things like burnout, right, in the movement. And I can honestly and wholeheartedly say that even in the hard times, the very hard times, my life ain't been no crystal stair, okay? And even in the very hard times, in the most certainly here experiencing all of us being witness to the murder of George Floyd, doing the much needed work in the midst of the uprising, as I'm the wife of a currently incarcerated person who has been for our entire adult lives, right? And so just thinking about like the many layers of things that we experience and that we see and that that don't just happen, right? They do happen because there are people who make decisions and choices in the world. And the thing is that coming back to what I can honestly tell you 100%, is that I have never gotten close to burnout. And I'll tell you why. I will say absolutely that it is God, but it is God that guides my feet to do the work and to do it in community. And to do it truly in community. Because I think sometimes I'm sure a lot of folks in this room have done the work and you realize it's 20% of the people doing 80% of the work, right? But the reality is when we really are leaning on each other and in community with each other, we spread the capacity around. And so I have got to experience so much joy and hope in the work that I would not have had it if I wasn't in the work. Like, that is an honest to God truth. Honest to God truth. I remember the day that I felt the most hopeless. It was when my husband in the prison had gotten COVID. This was in August of 2020. Literally every other person around him has COVID. All of them have COVID. Every time I'm on the phone with them, you just hear coughing and hacking. And there was a news story in the city, in the small town where his prison is, that said that 60% of the officers in his prison had tested positive for COVID, and 0 inmates. They printed that in their newspaper, which I'm like, that is a statistical impossibility, but it's because they would not test them. right? And so I was calling every lawyer I could find, the ACLU, anything. My husband's incarcerated in another state, and I'm like, I have all this power in Minnesota because I've built people power in Minnesota. Had he been in Minnesota, he would have got tested. But it was so hard to do that in a whole other state. And I felt hopeless. Now, praise the Lord, things have shifted since then in a lot of really great ways, but I realized in that moment that that is the thing that makes the difference, is that I get to do the work with people. I don't know how many of you know about all the dynamic and dope things that just passed in this 2023 legislative session. Okay? And just like the smallest snippet of a list includes voting rights restoration for 55,000 people who are formerly incarcerated. It includes statewide paid family medical leave. It includes paid sick days for every single working Minnesotan. It includes 100% clean energy in this state. It includes so many dynamic things. Driver's licenses for undocumented people, a public health system that also includes undocumented people. Like, it is the most wildest and beautiful list of things that we've been working on for decades. Decades. I've been with Isaiah for 7 years, and this is my 7th session working on these issues. And I will tell you wholeheartedly, every single year we were at the legislature, thousands of us testifying, writing letters to the editor, talking to our legislators, rallying together, singing at the Capitol, praying at the Capitol. It felt the same every single year, including this one. And that meant that we were filled with hope every single year. And when the session was over, not this session, but the sessions before, when we didn't win the big thing, we still got to make meaning about what we did win. We still got to make meaning together about what we got to do together, what we built together, the kind of power that we increased together, the kind of narrative shifts that we made in the world. The more and more young people who got involved this year who didn't the year before. More and more seniors who got involved this year who didn't before. More and more folks of color who got involved this year who didn't before. We made meaning with each other. And that continued to build our hope and our resilience for the next session. And it wasn't like, oh, we'll do this session, I'll see y'all next session. We continued to organize together every month, through the summers, through the fall, into the next session. And it is that kind of, it's not the kind of, I think sometimes we idolize and resilience, where it's really like backbreaking, right? But like, it is truly a joy to do the work when you are really doing it in community, So I would say, like, I certainly don't, I'm not poo-pooing anyone who is feeling like a level of anxiety that's brought them to the brink of burnout. But I am saying to reach out into community, like find your people, because that is truly the thing. It will continue to spark that hope and that thing that you need to like get you to the next point. Sometimes getting out of bed is a revolutionary act. Like, for real, but we really do need each other, and I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So why don't we open up for some questions? Clarence, you... Yes. So again, part of hybrid etiquette is that we want the people out there remotely to hear the questions that might be asked here without my having to repeat them. So would someone like to ask a question?
Yeah, I go.
How did you keep from having polarization in your community?
So I guess he was looking at you, Minister JaNaé, to start with, but we'll get George in also. But Please, go ahead.
Yeah, and just want to have clarity. Which community are we talking about? Like the Isaiah community, the Black community, the preacher community? There's a whole lot of communities. Was there any particular one you were thinking of?
Well, I was thinking of the community that kept you from losing hope
Yeah.
and kept you from burning out.
Yeah.
So what community did that, and how, did they have any polarization?
Yeah, I mean, so I would name that this, so that would be the Isaiah community, right? And just for clarity, because I don't want to assume everybody knows what Isaiah is. So Isaiah is we are a grassroots power building vehicle, right? So we are a coalition of institutions. We organize about 200 Christian congregations, about 40 Islamic mosques. Through the Muslim Coalition of Isaiah, we also organize 504 child care centers, most of them owned and operated by women of color and immigrant women. We also organize the Young Adult Coalition, which are college students and young renters. And we also have the Rural Organizing Project, which is rural folks, small farms, and families within townships and congregations within townships in rural Minnesota. And so, and we have the Black Barbershops and Black Congregation Cooperative as well. So there are a lot of constituents a part of Isaiah. So it's about a constituency of about 500,000 people all across the state and have various identities and we actually, this is coming back to the thing that I was naming before about we organize together, which means that we get grounded in our own stories, right? The stories that we're told, the stories that have helped to shape our own worldviews. We have what's called pain to power conversations, where we get grounded in, the stories of self and kind of like our own heroes' journeys. But how is it that we're taking the pains that we've experienced and leading us to be more powerful people? And we do leadership development together. We are deeply invested in one another. And so that allows for the things that most certainly could polarize us, right? It actually gives us the ability to have true and authentic relationships with one another so that it's not transactional. I think we've gotten used to being in a world where we treat these transactional interfaces as they're our relationship currency, and it's not. The thing is true relationship is really getting to know one another and see one another for who we are and developing the kind of empathy that's needed. And so the kind of polarization that I was naming when George and I were up here speaking is about because I would probably say there isn't anyone in the opposition in Isaiah, right? But also, I want to be clear, because I think this has come up a little bit too, around this notion of opposition. And if anyone is interested in taking the deep dive of race, class, gender narrative training, shameless plug, you can always go to faithinmn.org/trainings and come to a training that is always free, and I run them once a month. But anyway, I would say that the thing to remember about that is that it is important to name our villains. It is very important, actually, to name our villains. And everybody in that oppositional group are not necessarily your villain. But when we don't name villains, then we allow the general narrative to tell the story for us. And our dominant narratives, which as someone has already named earlier, usually says that it is Black people or brown people or women, right? And so if we just say racism is the reason that we don't have blah, 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 that may be true, but most people hear that and they're like, well, what do I do about that? Racism is a system. Sexism is a system. Xenophobia is a system. What can I do about that? It puts people in a spirit of apathy. But when we explicitly name who the villains are, you know, and I'll give you an example because I know some of y'all are looking at me like, what? But like, you know, sometimes we'll say rent is too high, rent keeps going up, and people can't afford it, and this is especially true for Black and brown people. That may be true, but when we say it like that, most people hear that and go, huh, so Black and brown people can't afford their rent like the rest of us? Like, that sounds like a Black and brown people problem. Maybe they didn't get the right job or work hard enough or whatever. Or they'll say, wait a minute, you were talking to me about rent, and now you're talking to me about Black and brown people. It's a non sequitur. The reality is, and then it's like rent is going up. We say that a lot. Rent keeps going up, or somebody's house was taken. Somebody's house, they lost their home. The right thing is to say is their house was taken, right? But like, to say something is going up, instead, we should say things like, you know, we all deserve somewhere to live, and it should be quality and affordable. And yet we know that there are corporate landlords and private equity groups who have constantly extracted and exploited families. And they've done that with white families, they've done that with Black families, but they think that if they can pit our families against one another based on what we look like, that will allow them to continue to scapegoat some of us. But we know that when we come together, we can actually have the kinds of homes and communities and neighborhoods we deserve. Like, it's that thread of being able to name explicitly that there's a villain who is dividing us by race, which is saying it's racism, but it's being way more explicit so that the hearers can say, oh, yes, systems are people who do things and make decisions. And we collectively get to make decisions too. So how are we taking responsibility and agency to make sure our decisions, the big collective, we have way more power together? And I know that is way more of an answer than you were looking for, but I hope that a little bit of what you were looking for was also in that answer.
Thank you. Let me add a little something and throw it to George, and that is in the last 2 years, I have been disturbed by people on the left beating each other up over, is NATO the problem or is Putin the problem? And so I think that, you know, part of the question is, how do we deal with polarization inside our movements and not just that polar? So I wonder, George, you want to take that on?
Sure. Take action. Put your energy into a group that is in action. Because what polarization invites is the energy of combat, right? And so we can always make combat out of differences, including what people wear or anything. We can make up anything, have a difference, and then have a fight about, because the energy is pro-fight, right? But if you're in an action group that is indeed in a kind of fight with, say, a bank that's blowing up mountains, then that need that polarization encourages is being met. We are in combat already with the bank, right? And that doesn't mean we have to be nasty to the bank, because it fully expresses our passion to be giving the bankers a very hard time. Let me just give a specific example, because these are generalizations. So we decided, after going to the bank's annual shareholders meeting, to see what the annual meeting would be like, and to ask questions, and to you know, why are you blowing up mountains, that kind of thing. Okay, then we got to know what the procedure was like and all that, and they would choose a large auditorium because they have a lot of stakeholders who come and fill the auditorium, and they put the board in the front, board members in the front of the auditorium, and then on the stage, the CEO sits with the treasurer, you know, and the secretary, and they run the meeting. And so we found out how all that works, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to shut the meeting down? So that would be like a combat tool, and that can be done nonviolently. We're confident about that. We're very committed to nonviolence, so nobody has to worry about getting physically injured or hurt. when we're in our combat mode, we're, you know, Dr. King is right. We can do this nonviolently. But we had to figure out a scheme, right? So once we understood how their format worked, we decided, okay, so a bunch of us will buy shares so we can get into the shareholders meeting. You can't get in unless you have share, right? Okay, so I'm a part owner of this bank, right? So I'm going in there with, there were 18 of us, and we figured out ahead of time we should sit all over among the other shareholders, not be a tight group, right? So we were all over the place. And, but to be frank, now a lot of our folks happen to be brought up by upper middle class people, professional middle class people who tend to be very rule oriented. And so the idea of breaking the rules became more and more like that the closer we got, you know, because people were brought up to be good people. And after all, it's not like nobody has a right to have a meeting, you know, so it wasn't like their having a meeting was a bad thing. So what right do we have to mess things up, right? And yet we were determined. So we went to our consultant, and I really urge you, if you're part of an action group, get a consultant, somebody who is with you, but they're on the outside of the group and can keep some objectivity. So we go to Daniel Hunter, and we say, Daniel, the closer we get to the big day, the more scared we are. Actually, I wasn't, because I was brought up working class, and that's really great in that situation, because working class people love to have a rumble once in a while. But anyway, most of the group was getting really scared. So what should we do? And Daniel thought, oh, okay, what can we do? Oh, he said, I know. Why don't you folks are good at having meetings, right? We said, yes, we're good at having meetings. Well, then why don't you develop the agenda for the meeting that you will have and go in there knowing that agenda. And then you just have a meeting of your own at the same time as they're having their meeting. And so that's what we did. So as right after the reading of the minutes, CEO was sitting up there. He said, oh, okay, now we'll have the treasurer's report. The treasurer gets up. It just happens to be the moment for our agenda item. And one of our gang gets up and starts being very loud in talking about our issue. Louder, actually, than the treasurer was, even though I had a microphone. And everybody was, of course, paying attention to us, not to the treasurer, right? And then we kept doing that. With each agenda item, whenever the CEO would call for the next agenda item, it'd be, hey, our next agenda item. Bah, 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 bah. I'll tell you, this is usually an hour-and-a-half meeting. 25 minutes in, the CEO said, this meeting's adjourned. And everybody was stunned, including us. We didn't think, well, it's going to be that easy. The back rows, I should tell you, were full of police, because he was expecting he'd have to make arrests at some point. He didn't want arrests. He didn't want that to be the headline in the next day's business page, right? He didn't want arrests. So, and we weren't exactly being nasty, you know, we were just having our meeting at the time they were having their meeting, but our meeting was about coal mining. And so he says, this meeting's adjourned. And we were all stunned that it was so easy, and the shareholders were stunned. And then, oh, well, if he said it's over, it's over. So people started to get up, and my daughter was there, and she started singing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, which is one of our theme songs. And so all the rest of us 18 started singing that, and so we were singing that as we were headed for this little light of mine. And I looked around, and some of the shareholders were singing, this little light of mine. So that's an example of how you can bring the energy of polarization, which is an energy of combat. It's an energy of fight or struggle. And you can bring that to the table, but bring it in a kind of, what would you call that? What would you call it? Generative. Yeah. A generative way. Yeah. Right. Because it generated for everyone.
Okay. I want to make sure that folks who are watching via Zoom, if you have a question, we'd love to see it in the question and answer section. And I think we want to get as many people as possible. Did we have a question back here first, and then we have one over here? Or
You got him? Okay. Thank you, Ruby. So I've just had a realization in this very thing we're doing here now, is that there were a lot of us who were in a coalition in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Minneapolis only, to create a Department of Public Safety that would subsume the police department. And JaNaé was in leadership in that, and leading communications and outreach. And thank goodness you were. But I'm just realizing the city was polarized.
Yes.
We had the sadistic police murder of Mr. Floyd, and then we started coalitioning, and in 2021 then we generated this campaign. And when we were on the doors and stuff, the polarization was big, it was like, wow. But we didn't win in the numerical, electoral sense, but 62,800 people voted for our initiative on an issue that had not been in their minds on June 24th, the day before the murder. It hadn't been in any of those minds. So I credit JaNaé with a lot of that success, but there was a coalition that was working together, and what a win, what a win. And now there are some of us who are regularly going to these consent decree meetings saying, here's the deal, here's the deal, and stuff. So I'm just so happy to have a frame like this for that campaign, because I feel incredibly proud of it and honored to have been a part of it. And I talk about it to people, and this gives me an even extra layer of talking. So thank you so much.
Great, very helpful.
Yep, thank you.
I just wanted to, how many people had heard about the campaign that Erica is speaking about in Minneapolis? I see a few. Oh, okay, so a decent amount of you. One of my so for those who don't know about that campaign, I'll just say very quickly, it was in response to the murder of George Floyd. The city wanted to do something that was more than just like yes, we'll do something about policing, right? They wanted to actually enshrine in law something that said they were gonna stand up and do something about it. And the Minneapolis Police Department specifically has 150 years of really heinous acts against Black folks explicitly, but other people of color as well. And so, the city's charter is set up right now that 35% of the city's budget immediately goes into policing. There's nothing that they can do about that unless they change the city's charter. And that meant that they couldn't put that money into, mental health folks and to substance abuse folks and homeless outreach folks to actually build a full department of public safety. And so I wanna pose a question to you all. So after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, there was all of these things that were said about what they could do about policing. And so in December of 2020, we ran a poll citywide in the city of Minneapolis to see how many people would be willing to replace the Minneapolis Police Department with a Department of Public Safety, okay? So that department would have all of those other qualified professionals, including police officers in this department. How many people do you think, or percentage-wise, do you think said, yes, I want to replace this murderous group of people with, a more holistic Department of Public Safety? In the same year George Floyd was murdered. I heard 60%. Good guess. Any other guesses? 60 or 16? What did you say? 60. Yeah, 60%. I got two 60%. Okay. 70%. Okay. 13. 13%. Yes. And so there were a bunch of brave souls, God bless them, who said, we're going to go and do this campaign anyway, even with the abysmal number of support. And so we spent 11 months building a campaign that talked about what we were for. And you know, you can hear in like some of the airtime, it's like, oh, it was about defund, it was about abolish, and whoop-de-whoop. We actually talked about, and I know there are probably people in the room who are like, heck yeah, defund the police or abolish the police. And okay, there were folks in the camp who were about that, but most of the folks in there were just like, I just want to be safe. Right? And so there were people who were reformers, there were people who were defunders, there were people who were like, I love the police. Some people were like, I am the police, and we need people to be safe, right? So we talked about what we were for. We were for safety. We were for people being able to get home safe. We were for people having the right response when they picked up 911, considering the majority of phone calls that come into 911 don't require police response, right? So that was what it was about. And that's what we talked about for 11 months. Now, I work in electoral politics, and I can tell you all, definitively, this is unheard of. We got 43.8% of the vote. To move 30 electoral points in 11 months is unheard of. It's unheard of. But this is something else I want to say, because I see younger folks in the room. Most people assumed in Minneapolis that the vote would be determined by race. So if you were black, you'd be more likely to vote yes. If you were white, you'd be more likely to vote no. Some of that kind of skewed that way, but not really. Do you know what the number one signifier was on if you were to vote yes or no? Age. Age. Literally in the city of Minneapolis, I imagine it's similar here in St. Paul, but we've done the numbers in Minneapolis. If you are 35 and under, if every 35 and under person, not even every, half of them, all went out and voted, they could run the city. I'm dead serious. I think that terrifies some people, which is why there's been concerted effort to get people to think their vote doesn't matter. Right? We also saw that that tended to be the lower number of turnout, but because they have the most voting potential on any issue, on rent stabilization, on wages, on everything. They could literally run the city. And I would argue run it really well. Right? So I'm saying all that to say, because I'm taking up way too much time, but I really do believe that like this notion of agency, coming back to like the importance of organizing an agency, people really believing that their voice matters, that they have power. And that's all of us, because I come back to, you know, white folks most certainly have stake. Our seniors certainly have stake, but it is also true that in the city of Minneapolis, the average voting age in 2021, when that campaign ran, was 69. Wow. Wow. 69. And we still got 43.8% of the vote. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? Yeah. So, anyway, if y'all don't get nothing from me tonight, democracy really matters. Multiracial, multi-generational democracy really matters. And yes, that also means voting.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Clarence, do you have something from the remote audience to?
I will in a moment. But
Okay.
I think there's a question over here,
great.
and I'm going to get to that question presently. So.
This is for Minister Bates. It's kind of complicated. I'm thinking of your challenge about the question of a stake, and what's your stake in it for white folks, and to be able to have some standing on level ground more involved in political struggle. And I guess I've had a few different thoughts on that. So one was, I think there's been some recent research and writing about the despondency that has affected the white working class, and I think maybe you refer to that a little bit. And just with the depressed wages and deindustrialization and losing jobs and chemical dependency and suicide, and suddenly how that's affecting the white working class has skyrocketed. So there's a direct stake there in fighting for economic justice. But then I've also thought about the accrued wealth that came about for white folks, especially after, let's say, things like the GI Bill after World War II, and who had access to low-interest mortgages and business loans and college education to be able to really accumulate generational wealth, which then created an inequity about what's the stake to hold on to what was passed down, and what's the stake for fighting for what you've never had. So I guess just the nuance of it that I'm really thinking about here, because I think that this is a critical question that you raised, and I'm very happy you did, and I just wondered if you have any comment on my comment.
Thank you for lifting that up. I think that's absolutely right. What I want us to not get into is like what sometimes is like oppression Olympics, like who has it worse, you know? We are there, we should be, hopefully, as a level set, we are all clear that like there are people who have it worse. And when it comes to the environment that we're all living and breathing in currently, we have most certainly issues of racialized and genderized violence and harm, economic harm that most certainly has hit Black folks the hardest and the fastest, and white folks are hit hard too, right? And I think sometimes that feels like a weird thing to say, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't say that, oh, I'm hurting too, so your hurting doesn't matter, right? Or, well, you're hurting so bad, so I have to ignore my hurt. That shouldn't happen either. And I think what tends to, where the problem can lie, especially in our own like left and progressive spaces, is when we get to the place where folks actually ignore or push away the pain or the hurt that they've experienced to say, oh, I'm just gonna work on yours and tell me your pity porn and how hard your life was, and then I'll go out and fight for that. And ignoring that you actually have experienced hurt and pain in your family history and your family line. Like, how are we connecting our like shared trauma? Again, in order to not to sit in it and be sad and depressed and anxious, but actually to use it, I mean, in a way that is powerful, where we can truly like come together. And I know that you are fighting for our collective liberation, that you recognize that it's not just like helping JaNaé or helping someone else, but that you recognize that I'm helping myself. I have a self-interest in us having liberation, right? That is truly, that is a reality. I find it often in climate spaces that I see that sometimes it's been frustrating because climate spaces tend to be very, very white, especially knowing that like environmental injustice tends to hit Black folks the hardest, right? But there is still this connection of I mean, for years it was, I need to have a, you know, clean air, clean water, healthy land for my grandchildren. Now people are like, I need to have it for me. Right? Like we are now approaching an era where it's like we recognize even in our own lifetimes we're seeing the effects of the climate crisis that has been created by corporations for decades, knowingly. And so how are we coming together and collectively doing something about it? I mean, I think just the existential crisis of that alone should ground us in our own stakes of why we have to collectively fight together. But yeah, I definitely hear you. Like, I would never say, like, ignore the fact that other people are very clearly being harmed by racialized and economic injustice. But I also say it's important for you to know your own stake.
Thank you. George, you want to speak to that? No. Amen. Amen. Okay. Okay. Clarence, do we have something from cyberspace?
Yeah, just a question earlier. You were talking about, well, it was brought up how there is some debate on the approach that we should, or we see some conflict happening around the issue of Ukraine, and was shared that, or they were asking you to speak more on, is this a matter of disinformation, or is it a matter of us really taking the time to look into the information and learn and educate ourselves on that, and maybe that being a source of the conflict rather than this misinformation campaign?
I haven't thought about that.
Good.
Yeah. In fact, I've been talking on this part of my book tour a lot about that with folks. And what I would request for people who are tempted to, for example, get into that debate, how much do you value your own time? And at the end of a year or 5 years, or at the end of your life, do you want to say, I used my time to the maximum impact? Or not? So there are some issues like that that can be incredible time drains that you cannot affect in any way. I don't talk with anybody about that issue because I value my time so highly. I want to use the time that God has given me on this earth to make maximum impact for justice and peace. And I don't want to waste it on things that I know there is no way I can affect. The U.S. has an empire. That's not news. There was a huge American debate in the late 1800s with a lot of anti-imperialists, big mass movement of anti-imperialists, and a big pro-imperialist mass movement. And guess which side the economic elite chose? So of course we have an empire now, and we operate like an empire, and we insist on having a huge military so that we can do, and we can deal, and choose favorites here and there and do all that. And all of that is done in a realm that you and I have nothing to do with. Now, once in a while, the empire gets involved in something, as in Vietnam, which it didn't bargain for, and it goes on and on and on. And it becomes possible for mass movements to actually have a say in that. I committed enormously. I risked my life in that campaign. Yes, let's put our lives to work on the things that we can impact and notice the difference between those things and the things that we cannot.
Thank you. Clarence?
Hello? Oh,
yes.
Good. Yeah, we should probably wrap it up because we have to do things like sleep, but also there are treats in the back for the folks who are here. So continue to this conversation.
If you haven't had a chance to hug Rupert yet, there are opportunities. Yes.
Yeah. So. Yeah, do that. Also, if you do not have the latest book, Subtext Books has copies waiting for you. I don't know if you'll be able to stop by and sign a few copies, but... Are they open right now? No, they're not. Not right now. But they have a stock of them. And I think, are you guys going to sing us out?
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Great. So again, thank you all for joining us here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, guys. I feel like my mind is moving. Yeah. It's really good. So good. Maybe you felt moved a little bit today to do more, and there is a sign-up sheet right on the edge of the counter there. If you want more information about some of the things you heard. If you want to know like about Good Trouble or Isaiah or George's group that's doing these bank occupations and interrupting shareholder meetings, we can send you some links to all that stuff. So you can sign up on that sheet. And then also, because this whole realm of nonviolent direct action is so creative and so wide, and I'm feeling personally like there's a lot that I don't know how to do, and I don't even have an awareness of what that could even be. And so Friends for a Nonviolent World is going to be organizing just creative direct action training, maybe 3 hours, just to experiment with like, what are some of the things that we could do? Do we, interrupting a stake shareholders meeting is something I never would have thought to do, right? So just to expand our brains and grow our skills in that. So that's another thing that is we could share about. And then finally, I just want to put in a little invitation. On Saturday, there's a big Walk for Peace and Justice. It's an event that's happening. It starts at Brackett Park in South Minneapolis. We're going to walk along the river, and it's just a chance to be in community with a lot of other awesome organizations here in the Twin Cities, raise some funds for the work that these groups are doing, and be together. So I invite you to come to that on Saturday. It's going to be a nice day, and the colors along the river are turning on the trees. So I invite you to come to that as well. There's some flyers about that too.
And before we turn to Good Trouble, I want to ask for applause for our colleagues who have been handling the tech for tonight. So, and that's Minna Zhao, Kristen Seo, David McAllister. Thank you so much for your work tonight and getting this feed out to a wider audience. And so thank you for your work. And again, thanks everyone for coming. And Connie and Liz in Good Trouble, take us out.
All right, all right. The last song that we want to do, the words are by my friend, my Jewish friend, Josh Blaine. No one is getting left behind this time. We get there together, or we don't get there at all. Okay? So, those are the words. It repeats a bit. I'll sing through it, and then I'll invite you to echo me, okay? No one is getting left behind this time. No one is getting left behind. No one is getting left behind this time. We get there together or never get there at all. We get there together or never get there at all. We get there together or never get there at all. Repeat after me. No one is getting left behind this time. Try that. No one is getting left behind this time. No one is getting left behind. No one is getting left behind. No one is getting left behind this time. It's the first. No one is getting left behind this time. We get there together or never get there at all. Repeat that. We get there together or never get there at all. We get there together or never get there at all. Try that. We get there together or never get there at all. We get there together or never get there at all. We get there together or never get there at all. From the top, friends. No one is getting left behind this time. No one is getting left behind. No one is getting left behind this time. We get there. We get there together, never get there at all. We get there together, never get there at all. We get there together, never get there at all. I invite you to stand up and sing this with me. No one is getting left behind this time. No one is getting left behind. No one is getting left behind this time. We get there together, never get there at all. We get there together, never get there at all. We get there together, never get there at all. Together, we get there.